Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a huge one, the Book of Genesis. For so many people, this is ground zero for the conflict between science and faith. So what is it? A literal scientific play-by-play of creation, or is it something else entirely?
Right off the bat, here's the problem that trips so many of us up. Scripture talks about a six-day creation, just a few thousand years ago. But science? Science points to a universe that's been around for something like 15 billion years. So how do you square that circle? Is it even possible? Do you really have to pick a side here? So, how do we begin to unravel this? Well, the first step is a big one. We have to realize that you can't understand an ancient text just by reading the words on the page today. Nope. You've got to understand the world it was written in. The real key isn't just what was said, but why it was said, and maybe most importantly, who it was said to.
And that leads us straight to the author and their audience. Seriously, understanding their situation is the master key to unlocking the whole meaning of Genesis chapter 1. We have to ask, who were these people and what problem was the author actually trying to solve for them?
Okay, so this timeline gives us the crucial context we need. Biblical scholars have a name for the author of Genesis 1. They call him the priestly author. And he was writing at this really specific, really dramatic moment in history, right at the end of the Babylonian exile. Just think about it. The Jewish people were finally coming home after more than 50 years living as exiles in a totally foreign land.
And their situation was, well, it was pretty dire. During that whole time in exile, they weren't allowed to worship their God. Generations had been born and raised completely soaked in Babylonian culture, Babylonian stories, Babylonian gods. For the most part, they'd forgotten who they were and who their God was. And in Babylon, there was this other creation story, a really popular one, that absolutely everyone knew.
And that story was called the Enuma Elish. You can think of it as like the blockbuster epic of the ancient world. It was the story about how the world began. So the priestly author knew that his audience, the returning exiles, would have this story memorized. He wasn't just writing into a void, he was writing a direct response to it.
And when you put them side by side, the contrast is just, wow. It couldn't be more dramatic. The Babylonian story starts with this violent, chaotic battle between a bunch of warring gods. The world itself is created kind of by accident from the dead body of a goddess named Tiamat. But Genesis 1, it starts with peace, with silence. One God creates everything with purpose, with order, with intention. It was a radical reintroduction to the God they had forgotten. And this is where those famous 7 days come into play. See, the priestly author isn't trying to give a scientific timeline of 24-hour periods. Not at all. He's using this absolutely brilliant literary structure to teach a profound theological truth about who God is and what his design for the world is.
This table shows you exactly what he was doing. It's just so elegant. Check out the symmetry. On days 1, 2, and 3, God basically builds the house. He creates the realms, time, space, and life. Then on days 4, 5, and 6, he fills that house with its rulers. Day 1, light and dark, corresponds to day 4, the sun and moon. Day 2, sky and seas, corresponds to day 5, birds and fish. Day 3 to day 6. You see, this isn't a random list. It's a beautiful picture of a divine, deliberate, and orderly plan.
But wait a minute, the pattern breaks, doesn't it? There's a seventh day, and it just stands all by itself. It's the grand finale of the whole story. So, if the first 6 days are all about God making the world, what in the world is the seventh day for? Why is it the most important day of all?
The answer is so cool. It's hidden right there in the Hebrew language. The Hebrew word for 7 is directly related to the word for swearing an oath, and the original Jewish audience would have gotten this instantly. The seventh day isn't just God taking a day off. It's the oath day. It's the moment God makes a covenant, a sacred family bond, with the one part of his creation made in his very own image and likeness. Us, humanity.
Okay, so let's tie this all together. How does this new way of looking at it solve that original conflict between science and Genesis? Well, once we see Genesis 1 not as a science paper, but as a profound theological story, the supposed contradiction, it just kind of dissolves.
The key is just realizing that science and faith are asking and answering totally different questions. Science, and that includes evolution, is great at explaining the physical how. The mechanics of how a human body develops from matter that already exists, what Scripture poetically calls being formed from the dust of the ground. But faith? Faith explains the spiritual who and why. It tells us where our immaterial soul comes from, the breath of life, which by its very definition can evolve from physical stuff.
It can only be a direct gift from God.
And what this all means is that there could be no real conflict between true science and true religion. And why is that? Because it all boils down to this one simple, powerful idea. Truth can never, ever contradict truth. They're just two different ways of looking at the one same reality.
And that brings us right to the ultimate takeaway from all this. The author of Genesis wasn't writing a lab report that he expected to be peer-reviewed thousands of years later. No way. He was telling a profound, cosmic story about a creator's relationship with his creation.
Honestly, you can just think of it as the plot of the greatest love story ever told. First, the lover, God, builds this absolutely beautiful home for his beloved. Then, he fills that home with every good thing they could ever need or want. And finally, on that seventh day, he swears an eternal oath, a covenant, to be in a family relationship with his beloved, with humanity, forever. So, the next time you read Genesis, maybe try not to ask the scientific question of how it all began. Instead, ask the much deeper, much more important theological question the author really wanted you to ask. What does this amazing story tell us about why we are here and who we were created to be?